Remember when DSLR prices first started coming down and it felt like literally everyone was a photographer pitching you on their services and seeing if you wanted to go get family pictures taken? Or maybe that was just me because I have a big family. I don't know. But in any case, more and more people are feeling like they're getting pitched by everybody on the new platform or app that they've developed. And there's a reason for that you need to understand, because there's some real risk behind it. And the risk is a lot greater than wasting a weekend and some cash on bad family pictures. I'm Christopher Lind, and this is Future Focused. And this week, I really want to focus on this death of the professional floor of safety around software architecture and building in a world where more and more people can just build the front end of an app or platform that looks legitimate, like it was built by a Fortune 500 software company, but has a back end that's held together by nothing more than digital duct tape. And so as we move into this vibes software era, we're in many cases trading architectural integrity for aesthetic polish, and that has real implications on you. So I want to focus on that. But before we do, if you enjoy my content, if you find value in it, it would mean the world to me if you liked it, subscribed, shared it with somebody who you think might benefit from it. And if you feel so inclined, you can go buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. Or check out my website. You can see the services and things that I provide, and maybe there's an opportunity for us to do some work together. Okay, so let's transition into this, because the way I'm approaching this is I want to talk directly to individuals and professionals who might be on the receiving end of all these different pitches, who maybe are not as used to getting them. If you've been in a corporate leadership role or in the IT field, you get hit with them all the time. But this is now hitting your everyday person. Hey, you should sign up for this. You should buy this. I can help you accomplish this. And it's territory many people are not familiar with. But I also want to talk to the corporate IT leaders, because what can happen with this, I watched or just read an article about Princeton where to resist this whole AI movement with students, they're going back to proctoring in-person exams. And it's one of these things where sometimes when things start sliding out of control, we try and go back to the status quo that was pretty awful in the first place. And in some cases, corporate IT, in an effort to protect the shadow IT movement as people are grabbing apps and doing all these things, can just end up making things more adversarial and worse on the inside, which just leads to people doing more of it. So taking the kind of approach from two angles. But before we get in, I do want to set some expectations on this, because when people start hearing, oh, these apps can put you at more risk, or your data is vulnerable, things like that, I do sometimes experience one of two reactions. Either one, people panic and they freak out, like it's the first time they've ever heard that their personal data is vulnerable, which this isn't new. Or they just roll their eyes because they've come to just accept that their data is somewhat vulnerable. And so they're taking some basic practices to, secure their passwords and make sure they have a junk email address, just the basic kind of stuff. And those are still good practices, mind you. I just want to acknowledge that. But we're moving into a different era. And so, yes, a lot of your data is already out there and vulnerable. It's never truly secure. So if you think I'm going to get to a point where none of my data is vulnerable and it's never going to be in the hands of anybody I don't want it to be, you're going to spend your life chasing that down and getting nowhere. So I'm not trying to convince anybody of that. But the other thing I would add to this is, with the level of integration these tools have more and more, if you're doing anything you shouldn't online, you need to stop. My goal here isn't to help people get better at, protecting illicit behavior or things that they don't want to get out, because in many cases that's a lost cause in and of itself. And I don't want to encourage that, but also you can't, and actually a lot of the tools out there that are promising to protect you from this are actually designed to funnel all of that data through them. So just as an FYI, if you're doing things you shouldn't online, you seriously just need to stop it, or things that you don't want getting out, because you will regret it. I just can assure you, if you haven't already experienced that, it's only going to get worse. I saw an article this week about how all these AI meeting apps, which might be a separate podcast in and of itself, but how these things are breaching client attorney privilege left and right and all this stuff. So just in short, with the tools we have, if you're doing something you wouldn't potentially want to become public knowledge, just stop. Just stop it. Okay, so let me shift over to kind of the professionals and individuals on here, because this is a different world we're in. Like I said, I recognize a lot of your data is already out there. It can be, in some cases, a fool's errand to try and truly peel back everything and create that. And best practices for data protection are important. If you have use two-factor authentication, use secure passwords, have an email address that you use for certain things, and then an email address that you use for your primary communication. Those are all good things, but even those things aren't perfect. So just know that. But this is shifting, because we're moving into an era where the tech that even basic people who are creating apps can build into these apps are much more intrusive. It's an era of data intimacy and API intimacy, where even just some of these folks who really don't know what they're doing can build relatively complex apps that can do a lot more than just maintain a database of your email address, some login credentials, and maybe some junk information that it gathered that when you use the app for a couple weeks before just dipping off of the thing. And what I mean by that is, if you think of it, just think of an example of this. More and more of these apps have two big shifts, and these are the two big shifts you need to understand. First of all, one, they are interconnecting with other apps. It is much easier to build an API, and I won't get into the nerdy tech details of what an API is, but basically what it is it's a connector between apps. And historically, they have been more difficult to build, and it took a little more technical acumen to do this. And so a lot of apps didn't have it. If you had an app, you just use that app. And so whatever was on that app was on that app. And so your vulnerability was really limited to the information on that app. But as these APIs become much easier to create, you see these all the time. You see Moltbot and these other things that can connect these apps to all your other main apps that you may think are secure, but now because there's a connector between this maybe more vulnerable app that was not built with the security in place that really should, that app now becomes a door, a channel for people, if it can get breached, to now capture and access and grab all this data. So this is why you just need to be aware that that shift is happening, and some of these apps that are offering all the convenience of interconnectivity are actually amplifying the risk. Now, the other big one is, if you think about the way AI works, and I've talked about AI glasses, these always-on devices, things like that, but even ones that may seem less intrusive, where maybe it's like, well, I don't really care that I'm, even generative AI apps where I've seen therapy apps or things like this, where you're just talking to it more and you go, well, but it's limited to that app, not realizing that you share a lot more information than you realize. And in doing so, we often are on cruise control and not thinking about the patterns, the details, the information that can be extracted from that formerly maybe couldn't, because it was just way too much information for anybody to do anything really meaningful with, and you weren't that big of a target, so it wasn't worth it. Well, now that's becoming accessible on levels that it never was before. And so these things, combined with the fact that anybody now with an idea can create them, add new layers of this. Now, compounding the problem is, many of us are tired, exhausted. We got a lot going on. And so there's this tendency to just be on cruise control. We hear a cool idea, something sounds neat. Maybe somebody we know is doing a thing and they say, hey, do you want to try this app out? We don't usually give a whole lot of thought to that. And so in this age of exhaustion, fatigue, cruise control, plus this other thing, we are becoming more and more at risk for real not great things to happen if you're not careful. So as an individual, my strong advice to you would be to add some just very basic, if we can even get people to all do these basics right, we'll see some significant things. So as some to-dos and some watch-outs. The advice used to be, if something's free, you're the product. And even that, I don't think we've made the progress we need to there. And so, and honestly, some of these tech companies have caught on to the fact that they know that. The other thing that's kind of broken that logic is, as more and more companies are being accessible, or more of this data development is being accessible to the masses, average people don't have the venture capital or the pockets to build an app and know they're just capturing loads of data that they'll be able to sell off to a VC firm before. So the whole idea of, if it's free, be careful because you're the product. Well, that doesn't always happen, because now you have a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs starting things. They need capital. So they have paid plans. They're charging for stuff. They may have a freemium tier, but you can be fooled into thinking, well, they charge for this, so obviously they're generating revenue. They must have done this the right way. The security architecture is all there, right? Because it's not free, and that's not necessarily the case. And so you need to actually, yes, remember that, while also adding in a new layer and saying, just because there's a paid version does not mean it's of higher tier quality and that your data is not their primary focus, or it's not as big of a risk for you. Now, I think this goes back to what I would call the ROI smell test, where more and more of these products are over-promising. If it's telling you it'll fully automate your life for $10 a month, or be your digital assistant and do absolutely everything for you for a few bucks, I mean, you got to think about this. How is a company with the actual amount of compute it's going to take to do all of this, how can they afford to give me all of this with little to no cost? And so you really need to actually be thinking about these things and asking, like, what am I actually getting for this? And is this a reasonable price for the service? Because if it sounds too good to be true, it is. And they are likely subsidizing some of that business, or at least some of the plan to subsidize the business is to capture data for the purpose of passing it off. And so if you think you're getting a great deal, it's no longer just, well, it's free, so I'm accepting that everything I put in here is going to be used for something else. You might think, well, I'm paying, so therefore my data is protected, right? And the answer to that is not necessarily. Not necessarily at all. In fact, that's becoming less and less the case as accessibility to building these apps is becoming more and more of a thing. Now, the other thing is, similar to the audit of, hey, what am I really getting? What kind of security can I really expect based on what I'm paying on this? Is this a startup? Have they been around the block? Type of a thing. But you really need to, and if you've been following my stuff for long, I talked about the fact that for a long time, the goal was to try and integrate all of our systems, to try and integrate everything together. So you'd have one pane of glass, or you used one app that could access, all of your other apps. That's actually putting you in a very vulnerable situation. And so I would strongly encourage everybody to be very careful about giving read-write access to, your Google accounts, your Microsoft accounts, your Slack, your WhatsApp, all these other, your bank accounts, for a tool that only needs to summarize a document, or maybe is offering to do this. One example of this that I saw that was gaining popularity for a while, there was a freemium app that would sit on your desktop and basically serve as your digital assistant, but it required you to be able to give it full authorization to your whole computer and everything on it. And it was one of those risks of, is that really worth it? So you can have a little chat bot glowing over there that rather than double clicking on the folder, you can just say, can you open this document, and it will find it. And again, if you don't understand the way this stuff works, you may say, well, but that's super convenient. But remember, convenience comes at a cost. And if a new startup is pitching you this whiz-bang tool that just needs all this information and access to you, and in return promises something that just feels off, lean into that. And I'm not saying there aren't opportunities where you can actually find things, that there aren't really ethical builders out there who are doing the right thing, who are putting in the work, who are building the security stuff. They do exist. But similar to COVID, when COVID first hit and everybody suddenly had a digital community and collaboration app, and everybody was signing up for all of them, just kicking the tires on them, not thinking much about it. We're in that stage again, and that stage isn't going to go away as accessibility to creating this stuff continues to rise. And so I genuinely want to raise concern for everybody out there to take this seriously. Be much more discerning and really ask yourself, is this legitimately solving a problem for me that I need solved? Is this a real issue that I have to tackle? And is this supplier, is this person who built this thing, do they have the chops and the background and the expertise and the finances to actually make sure they're doing this in a way that this isn't a weekend project they spun up and they're asking you to, give it try this out for a few months and let's see what we can get out of it. And again, I don't want to paint the folks who are doing this. I might have some folks who listen to this who might be building some of these apps. I don't want to paint you in a picture that you're all nefarious and trying to do this. There's a lot of folks who you just don't understand the implications of what you're doing. You don't understand how vulnerable the tools you're making are. And so I don't want to paint people as bad actors inherently in that space, because like I said, there's lots of people trying to do the right thing, doing things they truly believe are good ideas, creating these things, but that accessibility in the hands of folks, the photographer example is very much a thing. There's a very big difference between somebody who actually is a professional photographer and somebody who bought a DSLR camera and got excited and thought, hey, maybe I can make back the cost of this by taking somebody's wedding pics type of a thing, and they get in over their head. So just please, I really wanted to raise awareness to this because of some of the articles that I've been seeing, some of the trends that are happening right now, and the more people I talk to who feel like they're equipped and understand, they were caught up on the current practices of data security, that they've started falling behind on this. Now, on the flip side, as you can imagine, this is becoming a major problem within organizations, because as more and more people are signing up for these whiz-bang apps and widgets and all this other stuff and using them for whoever knows what, this causes real panic on the IT side, as you can imagine, and rightfully so, because of all the reasons I just described. I'm not going to recap all those things, but you can imagine they're sitting here going, all that information, all our people are now that much more vulnerable. And if they're integrating all this into our systems, that makes all of our systems. So regardless of how impenetrable we are, this opens up all sorts of doors. And the first thing I want to say is that if you're an IT leader listening to this, keep in mind, most people doing this are not bad actors. I have lots of friends who are in the IT space, and it can be easy to get into a mindset that people are just trying to make your life difficult. They just don't care about your IT processes. They don't care about IT security. And my experience has been most of the time, they're just trying to get their jobs done. They're under enormous pressure. They don't understand what they're signing up for. So please, if you're on the IT professional side, recognize these folks are often not bad actors or mavericks in the world trying to go out here. It's high performers, people who are struggling. They're feeling pressure. They're told you need to do something with AI, and so they're trying to find a way to use it in a way that makes their life easier. Which I get, that can make your life more difficult, which is why I want to talk to you about how can you try and mitigate some of this. Now, similar to what I said before to the individuals, if your goal is to make your security system airtight, well, that's like the person who says, I don't want anyone to be able to find any of my information online. Like, well, I mean, I guess you can do that. It's probably a bit of a fool's errand. You're going to spend a lot of your time going nowhere. But I think it's important to recognize shadow IT is often a symptom of one or two or a combination of both things. things. Either one, a lack of digital acumen, people just don't understand the implications of what they're doing, or it's a symptom of friction, where trying to do it the right way is too difficult. And so by it being too difficult, it's just faster, easier, more convenient if I can do it myself, rather than try and figure out what the IT process is, try and go through all the headache, only to be told I need a bunch of this information about this app that they don't really know what they're doing, type of a thing. So as an example, if vetting a $10 a month tool takes 3 months and requires a decade of experience in IT, knowing what questions to ask and multiple meetings with an integration partner, you are the security risk, not your people. And I think that's a really important thing, because when I've worked with organizations to try and streamline the process, many times complicated bureaucratic IT processes create so much friction. People go, you know what, it'd just be faster to put this on a P card. And in some cases, they're not wrong. And so anything you can do to try and streamline and make that process easy, even if you can just do a basic thing and figure out how can you run some basic security tests on some of these apps so that you can at least make sure, hey, is this thing at least not malware? Is this at least something that, you know, isn't going to try and connect to some of our critical IT infrastructure and, you know, have access to things? Look for some of those big red flag things that you know people are likely going to do. You know, if it's a scheduling assistant app, you know it's going to have access to the calendar system, which means it's going to have access to your Exchange or your Google Workspace accounts. Those are ones, you know, you're probably going to want to make sure, like, hey, what protocols do we have it connecting to? What options do people have? And how do we at least quickly test to make sure these things are here? And actually have a pretty quick risk assessment of, are people really putting critical information into this? If you can do that as quickly as possible, I've helped IT organizations really streamline this and help change the attitude of, you know, if you're the organization of no, people are going to avoid you. But if they are aware of what the process is, they realize, hey, just do us a favor before you go buy this and start using it for work. Can you at least just give us this? Here's our turnaround times. Here's what we'll do. We'll at least just make sure this is here. We'll check to see, do we already have something like that? So before you go spend some money, we'll do that. Because that's the other thing. Sometimes the temptation is to go, well, we'll create a list of all the apps we've approved of. Again, you're creating friction. Most people don't know that this app over here does the same as the app they're thinking about. They don't understand this world. And so to them, they go, this is the one I know about. So anything you can do, which hopefully you're using AI to free up some of your time to look through some of this stuff and streamline it so that you can very quickly do it. But you also have to make people aware of what this looks like. And that requires communication and engagement with your community. I've done some project work recently where really we've been trying to set up infrastructure and support for organizations to say, hey, how do we continue getting in front of people, making sure they know, and even coming up with little ad campaigns before you subscribe. I can't remember what the catchphrase was, but like before you subscribe, and then it was like, do this thing. And it really helped people be able to do it so that at least there was some arms around it. Like I said, you're not going to get 100% around this, but it's worth that. And I'm confident anybody listening to this who's not the IT professional would likely agree with me. Hey, if there's an easy, fast way that's going to get me through some of this stuff, I'm okay doing it, because most people don't want to put the company at risk. They just don't realize they're putting the company at risk, and they really don't know how to get around it. And then I think the other one is, you know, if there are some approved things, make sure people know that they're there and create environments where people can quickly figure out. And if you can, make, you know, part of that recommendation back, hey, you're looking at this tool. We actually have something very similar here, or we're in the process of creating something like this in our sandbox. Would you like early access to it? Because the reality is, and this is, I think, one of the real dangers, many people get apps thinking they're going to use it, and then they don't, but they continue paying for it. They continue keeping its access open and things like that. And so the more you can be engaged with your audience, know what they're doing, offer them solutions, keep them in your ecosystem, the better you're going to be. And it's really an opportunity to be partners with the organization rather than constantly trying to fight them, and becoming an organization of how. Let's talk about what problem you're trying to solve, and let's figure out how we go about doing this in a way that is beneficial to all of us. And the reality is, I've done this in orgs of my own and then orgs that I've worked with, where we've actually been able to find some real innovation internally to be able to pull some of this stuff off that has really helped the organization move forward. You may be able to help, you may have talent in your org working on things that it would legitimately help you didn't realize was there. And you can tap into that if you actually start creating some of these partnerships versus being seen as, well, don't bother working with IT. This also leads to headcount and all sorts of other things being wasted. It's not just software. So to the IT leaders, just be really careful how you respond to this. I recognize, and I'm right there with you, trying to help mitigate some of the very legitimate risks that are things you really didn't have to worry about quite the same as you do now. And I continue to try and help others get around that. But we got to do just as much work in the mirror, because if we don't, we're actually incentivizing the very thing we're trying to stop. So for individuals, please be extremely discerning and audit your permissions. Think through, do I really need this thing? I had a long conversation with my son last night. We were just laughing about some of these things we think we need without even really thinking through, like, what am I actually going to do with this? And I think some of that not only is going to save you some cash, but it's also going to protect you from potential breaches. If the ROI seems too good, it is. And your data will be the difference, and your vulnerability will be the difference. For IT, really do what you can to work with your people. I continue to be impressed with how much even some of the most rogue maverick people I've encountered over the years, who seemed like they really were just bucking the system to buck the system, truly were just in a position that they thought they were doing the right thing. And when I actually teamed up with them, they actually became one of my greatest amplifiers, one of my greatest advocates to help fight back some of these very legitimate risks. Because being future focused, it does mean moving fast. I talk regularly. My goal here isn't to slow everybody down. It's just about having the right strategic friction and knowing when to use your brakes in an effort to keep you on the right tracks and keep you from going over the cliff. So please, this is continuing to become a major and continuing to rise problem for individuals and organizations alike. Take it seriously, take steps. If you have questions, reach out. I'll be doing my usual Q&A on this. But again, I hope you found this helpful. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and we will see you on the other side.